timeline you can refer to today. And the statue, we're not there yet, but don't let anything happen to it because you'll need to use it. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to, if y'all will join me in prayer as we go to the Lord. Father, we are so thankful for the opportunity to study your word. We know, Father, that I'm not the real teacher. Your Spirit is the teacher of this lesson. So, Father, I just pray for each one who has come. You have brought them. You have brought them here. And you brought them here to study your word and for the Holy Spirit to speak to them and to teach them. Thank you, Father. We thank you for the pastor who is so faithful. He is faithful to videotape, to set this up, to spread this word, and to love and encourage all of you, all of us. So, Father, as we open your word and we begin to study, this is your group. These are your children. This is your word. And Father, this is your time. Thank you for all your rescues a broken world and points to Christ who accompanies this. He accomplishes this. So in the Old Testament, God revealed himself in types and in shadows, through promises and prophecies. In the New Testament, God reveals himself in Christ, who is the substance of every shadow and the fulfillment of every promise and prophecy. The Old Testament predicts God's rescuer. The New Testament presents God's rescuer. In all of its pages and throughout all of its stories, the word of the Lord presents the Lord of the Word. We can't ever forget that. The plot line of the Bible, in other words, is Jesus Christ centered. He is the rescuer sent by God to rescue all the wrongs, mend all that is broken, and reconcile separated, fallen human beings like you and me to God. So, we begin the study of Daniel. This is a prophetic book, and it teaches, a theme of it, teaches God is in control of human affairs. Just went up. Good. No matter what kind of disasters we experience. So the sovereignty of God over human life is really the theme. Two great books that contain specific end-time prophecy are Daniel, which emphasize the Gentiles. Revelation, which emphasizes the Jews. So, what Revelation is to the New Testament, Daniel is to the Old. To better understand Daniel's message, we must see how his visions fit into the overall scheme of prophecy. That's why you have that handout, which looks like, I'm not sure I can get it out of my thing. Looks like, well, gotta get it. Yeah, the panorama of prophecy. It has the yellow date line of the church on there. So if you pull that out, that will kind of help you as you begin. Because with this particular, get mine out too. This particular one shows the plan. And it shows Daniel and the chapters of Daniel that speak to that particular time. So, the law began on Mount Sinai. God gave Moses 10 commandments and a long list of instructions for holy living. Under God's hand, Israel became a great nation. For the most part, people rebelled against God. Civil war split the nation. The 10 northern tribes were Israel. The 2 southern tribes were Judah. Both nations, both of them, murdered his messengers, broke his law, worshiped pagan gods, and God finally handed them over to foreign powers to reap the harvest of destruction that they had sown. Assyria defeated Israel. Assyria, very cruel bunch. The Babylonians finished off Judah. Now, among the first exiles to be deported was promising young Daniel. He was young. After 70 years of captivity, caravans of Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem and start rebuilding the temple. Israel was a nation once more, though often under the dominion of Gentile powers, which we will see, and that's important. The Old Testament closes with Malachi, and Malachi warns the Jews not to repeat the mistakes that led to their destruction. 400 years passed with no fresh word from the Lord. Suddenly, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, announcing the coming of Jesus the Messiah. Living and ministering in the law era, Jesus did what no one else could do. Remember, Jesus was born under the law. He perfectly fulfilled God's righteous demands. Through his death and resurrection, Christ atoned for the sins of all lawbreakers, ushering in the age of grace. So the church, if you will look at yours, you'll see there, it is this yellow area right there. The church age was hidden behind a curtain of mystery to the Old Testament prophets, including Daniel. You see, these lines don't stop there at the church there. So Jesus pulled back the veil when he announced he would build his church, and even the gates of Hades shall not overpower it. That is in Matthew chapter 16. Besides, let me just tell you while I'm parked there for a second, Matthew is a decidedly Jewish book. So it refers often to things Jewish. Christ Church building project began at Pentecost. That was the beginning. The church when the Holy Spirit descended on believers in Jerusalem, and that was in the book of Acts chapter 2. We don't know how long the church age will last, because it's going to last until when? The rapture. The rapture, y'all know that. But we do know that it's going to end at the rapture when Christ returns to gather his followers in the clouds. In the clouds is in the second coming of Christ. He's going to the rapture is in the clouds. And he's going to gather his followers in the clouds. He will not come to the earth. We will go to him. So the rapture, in the twinkling of an eye, all who have trusted Christ for their salvation, both living and dead, will exchange their old earthly bodies for heavenly new ones. As a result, we will escape the hour of testing. That's a tribulation. We'll escape that. God has planned that for the world. Now, the tribulation, that's time of judgment. He will pour out the boiling cauldron of his wrath in a series of judgments that will culminate in the battle of Armageddon. Now we're into the second coming of Christ. Us with him, by the way. So the second coming of Christ to the earth, when all the armies of the world have assembled at the plain of Armageddon, they're coming, they're going to demolish, destroy Israel once and for all. There they are. And they're on the plain of Armageddon, and Christ will return to earth, this time not as a baby, but as a mighty warrior. Armies will include the raptured saints. That's us. We're coming with him. He will conquer his foes and throw the beast and the false prophet alive into the lake of fire. Then there will be the millennial kingdom, 1,000 years. Jesus himself will rule the earth in true righteousness and peace. And then there will be a new heaven and a new earth. With evil vanquished, God will resurrect the dead and usher them. Remember, these are people that died without the Lord. They have not been taken care of yet. They will now be raised, and they will appear before the great white throne of God. Now, that great white throne, it might sound good. No, it is bad. I mean, because the only people that appear before that are the lost. And then the Lord will destroy the old heaven and earth in a fiery cataclysm and create a new heaven and a new earth. So I wanted you all to understand what the prophetic plan is, so that as we deal with Daniel, you understand that. Now, Daniel, let's talk about him. He didn't foresee all the valleys of God's plan. He didn't. But he did observe 5 mountain peaks. That's what's on your handout right there. He saw the rebuilding of Jerusalem. He saw that. He saw the rise and fall of several Gentile nations. He saw the coming and death of the Messiah. He saw the time of trouble. That is the tribulation. And he saw the time of righteousness. That is the millennial kingdom, lasts 1,000 years. Only 2 of these events remain to be fulfilled. So the book of Daniel gives us a long and dramatic overview of the centuries from the time of the Babylonian Empire to the very end of time. Daniel was brought as a captive to Babylon when he was just a teenager. Just a teenager. He stayed through all the years of Israel's captivity, approximately 70 years, until he was in his mid to late 80s, still over there in Babylon. He served as a ruler of the Babylonian kingdom, the Median kingdom, the Persian kingdom. He was right in the center of all that. God was doing whatever God was doing in these powerful dynasties. This is in the book of Daniel. During all the troubles of his nation, Daniel stood like a pillar amid all of this, all of it. The reason? The sovereign God of the universe was the sovereign Lord of Daniel's heart and life. That's the reason. John's revelation, remember John wrote the book of Revelation, it's largely based on Daniel. Could be said that the Apostle John is the Daniel of the New Testament. The book of Daniel and the book of Revelation stand and fall together. I love both of them. The Lord tells us that the book of Daniel is a book about the times of the Gentiles. It's about our time. What are we? We're Gentiles. Daniel unfolds for us the rise and fall of the Gentile pagan kingdoms from his day until the day of Jesus Christ. Its outline is simple. Chapters 1 through 6 are history. Chapters 7 through 12 show God's secrets being revealed to Daniel. The lesson that we need to learn from Daniel is there is a God in heaven that rules in the kingdom of mankind. One day, our God is going to set up his kingdom upon this earth. He will be the King of kings and the Lord of lords forever and ever. Daniel is the prophet of the times of the Gentiles. In the book of Daniel, God never refers to the Jews as my people. You notice that. But as your people, meaning Daniel's people. That is the way. Don't let that go, because that is important. At this point in the history of Israel, God has set aside his plan for his people. The Jews, right now, he has set them aside. These prophecies in the book of Daniel were given at a time when the nation of Israel was set aside nationally. Daniel is the prophet of the times of the Gentiles. When you get to Revelation, that's the time of the Jews. So, in verses 1 through 7, get my Bible out here where I can get to it. Oh, went over to Ezekiel. No, we've done that one. 1 through 7 in the book of Daniel. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his god, little g. And he brought the vessels into the treasury of his god. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom there was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature, the language of the Chaldeans. And I might add, that's a very difficult language, but that's what he ordered. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years. 3 years they're given for their education, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now, among them, from the sons of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel, he assigned the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Now, see, some kids don't realize when they're learning those names what the basis of those names really is. So in the first chapter of Daniel, we see a young man stripped of every external support of his faith and identity in God. The first Gentile king to trample Jerusalem was Nebuchadnezzar, very powerful king, who helped himself to the temple's treasurers, went in there and just got them all, and selected a group of Judah's finest young men to be taken to Babylon as his private servants. This is where Daniel enters the scene. The ones selected had to meet certain criteria. Now remember, no cell phones, no way to get back in touch with their parents. Didn't bring their parents with them. No with their families, anybody. They were by themselves. So in verse 4, they had to be young, without blemish, no blemishes, strong and healthy, good looking, and well built, highly intelligent and able to learn. Yeah, they only had 3 years. Young men of social grace. Now, Daniel was forcibly grabbed. They didn't ask for volunteers. He was forcibly grabbed, marched off to Babylon, roughly at the age of an 8th or 9th grader. You know, they can be kind of squirrely at that age. At least mine were. So there were no parents, no chaperones, No older brothers or mentors. No. He would remember his people and his God, but would be denied every opportunity to learn more, to be cared for and supported. They would be changed. At an extremely vulnerable age, when the world made no sense to them anyway, I mean, 8th, 9th graders, the world didn't make a lot of sense to them. These boys were taken to serve a violent and terrifying king, Nebuchadnezzar, for the rest of their lives. Daniel is regularly by himself. Many of the tests that Daniel faces, he almost always faces alone. Daniel never got to live with his people. No. He was taken 8 years before the others of nobility were exiled. So they hadn't even, the rest of the exiles were still back. They had not come to Babylon yet. By then, when they got there, he was well ensconced in the palace of the king, because the king had him with him. And remember, he only had 3 years to learn everything he had to learn. And he had to learn it in the Chaldean language. So Nebuchadnezzar set out to brainwash the young boys with this 3-year course. Let me tell you what they learned. They learned the Chaldean language. They had to learn that, and they had to learn it pretty quick. All the learning of the Chaldeans, astronomy, astrology, architecture, and religion. Guess whose religion that was? That wasn't theirs. He probably made them into eunuchs. Now, according to Josephus, the historian, he says that also Isaiah prophesied to Hezekiah in 2 Kings 20:18, and in the New Living Translation as well as the ESV, it will say that some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, that will be born to you will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So they would partake of the king's food and drink. They were going to be well fed, and that would become part of their lifestyle. This choice food came from the king's table. Took away their Jewish names, they couldn't have those anymore, and gave them Babylonian names. So Daniel, which means God is my judge, became Belteshazzar. And Hananiah, which means Yahweh is gracious, became Shadrach. So Mishael, who is like God, became Meshach. And Azariah, Yahweh is my helper, became Abednego. So you see those names, you know right from start where those came from. So the king wanted them to forget all about their God and all that was of Jewish religion and character. Wanted them just to forget it. Jewish law had no direct prohibition against learning the language and culture of a foreign nation. No law against accepting the name given by a foreign king. There was a definite prohibition against eating food that had been offered as a sacrifice to the Babylonian gods. There are a lot of them. So to eat such food was to participate in the worship of a pagan king's god. So you couldn't eat that food. Daniel had learned, folks, an important lesson. It's never right to do wrong. Where God said no, Daniel said no. Oh, need to learn some of that in our society. Kids often are taught what is right, but when they get to making their own choices, 19, 20, some of them say, well, no, this is a new time. That's your time. That's the old time. We're in a new age. This is what we do. So, although he was young and in the minority, he kept his commitment. All meals served at the king's table were feasts, and among the heathen feasts were feasts in honor of these gods. So to share in such a feast was the equivalent of honoring such an idol, admitting his claims and existence, practically denying the one true God. So the king was determined to replace the boy's Jewish values with Babylonian values. Everything familiar had been taken away. Think about that. Just think about it. As we go through this book, what I want you to do, even though you're female, say, I'm going to be like Daniel. I'm going to see what decision I would make when I had to make a decision. Because Daniel's going to have to make a lot of decisions. And if you were Daniel, or you were in that position, what decision would you make? So that's going to get tough. So the feasts were feasts to honor the gods. So the king was determined. He was just determined. They weren't going to have any Jewish values left. Everything familiar had been taken away. Their homes, their families, their religion. Imagine a 14 or 15-year-old boy living hundreds of miles from his family, not able to see them ever, forced to take college-level courses in a foreign language, constantly exposed to pagan philosophy, constant, surrounded by sights and sounds of a big city, no going home, no taking a break, no getting a vacation to go back and see mom and dad, no summer vacations, only day in, day out, brainwashing in the ways of the world. Be quite a test of belief, wouldn't you think? Daniel passed with flying colors. It's unfortunate that most of our Christian commitments, folks, are made during times of ease. Think about it. And spiritual renewing. A long time ago, they used to have revivals. That was to revive us. Y'all remember that? Yeah, they'd get some really good speakers in, and they would listen. Boy, that was a time of renewal. Well, that is most of what we do now. They come during times of retreats or maybe chapel programs, mission conferences, church meetings. Those commitments are always, when we make those, they are always tested in the crucible of pressure and suffering, always. We demonstrate our integrity when the will to stick with our commitment never wavers. Even when grueling times arise, whatever commitment that was, we turn to the Lord and He gives us the strength to stick to it. We are believers of integrity when we refuse to drop out of the ministry by which God has called us. You say, God didn't call me for anything. Oh, you're not hanging in there with Him. He called everybody to do something. So, even though God calls us, and even though the circumstances are not anything like we thought they would be, so we say, when it gets hard, well, God, I don't think you called me to this. I'm going to quit. I don't think you called me to this. Nothing's going right. Well, there's Satan out there. So in verse 8, but Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. So Daniel decided that the royal food and wine carried defilement. We should not assume that the alcohol content of the wine was at issue here. This is not the issue which is being taught. The food was not kosher. Remember, he's Jewish. Food might have been offered to idols before it was ever served. In ancient pagan religion, portions of food and wine were first offered to household deities. So the eating and drinking of that food implied some recognition of those deities. Exodus 34:15 forbids this. Daniel's attitude was more important than his diet. He resolved not to defile himself. So in verses 9 and 10, now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. Oh. So, for the second time, the sovereignty of God controls Daniel's situation. First, he delivered Judah to Babylon. God did that. He did that. He delivered Judah to Babylon. Jews weren't doing what he said. They were, and you know, a lot of times, as I've told y'all before, if I get stuck in traffic or whatever, I think, oh, I shouldn't have got to start grumbling. I said, sound like an Israelite. That's what you sound like. So just be thankful that you have a car, that it runs, that you're able to get where you're going, and stop that. And of course, if I forgot that, the pastor preached on that on Sunday. Yes, you did. And he preached on complaining. And I think of that sermon when I stand in front of the gas tanks to get filled, you know, and the price keeps going up. And I said, I just got to be thankful that there's gas there. The pastor says no complaining. And so this you'll see, he delivered Judah to Babylon. These Jews weren't living for him, so he delivered them. He works in the heart of Ashpenaz to produce kindness and sympathy toward Daniel. God does that. When one serves a pagan king, the rules aren't changed at a whim. No, they're not going to. Kindness is one thing. Risking your head for kindness is another. In other words, that means you're going to chop it off. That's risking your head. So the menu came directly from the throne. If Daniel and his buddies showed up looking weak and pale because of their chosen diet, Ashpenaz's head would be carried out in a bucket. He's going to lose his head. He explained to Daniel why this might not be a good idea. So in verses 11 and 12, but Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Daniel moved to Plan B, a test run on a vegetarian diet. The appeal went to the guard, who the chief official had appointed, Melzar. Now, Melzar's not a proper name, but the word for steward. He was the steward there. So in verses 13 and 14, then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. Any legitimate assessment requires verification of the results. So Daniel invited a direct comparison with those who ate the king's fare and the Hebrews. So Daniel had no fear that God would not honor his stand on defiled food. The 4 Jewish students didn't threaten anybody. They didn't stage a protest. They didn't try to burn the building down. They didn't try to do any of those things. They excelled in their studies. They acted like gentlemen. They asked Melzar to test them for 10 days by feeding them only water and vegetables. Now, you know the easy way out, the excuse. I've often said I could write a book on excuses because I've been teaching for years and years. Students are very creative. But these guys could have said, look, I'm here at the king. I'm in his presence. I have to eat what he gives me. And this is all this great food. I mean, I have to eat it because I'm under his care and I'd be in trouble, and all these people would be in trouble too. They lose their heads or whatever if we do this thing. So that would be a really good excuse. I mean, people would say, yeah, you poor guys, that's all you can do. It's just eat what they give you, even though it's all the very best. So they were going to test them, and in verses 15 and 16, at the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who'd been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine that they were given to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. There's no surprise here. When people take a stand for God and follow the principles of his word, they always pass the test with flying colors. Don't insert a miracle here, since one is not required. A diet of water and vegetables would surely be red meat and wine. Now, I know I have a lot of sons that would debate that, but that these boys were doing this, and this is what God was going to take care of them. The vegetables became their diet. Christians need the courage to resist worldliness. In his book, Dreams and Dictators, the author says, the danger is we derive our thought and conduct not from scriptures, but from the world. Yep, we do. These two sets of norms are completely opposed to each other. Forgiving our neighbors again and again, praying for our enemies and business competitors, treating others as we would have them treat us. This is the conduct on which the church, the believers, should subsist. So in verse 17, as for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. All 4 had superior intellectual skills, but only Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Since Daniel wrote these words, because he's the author of this book, we might think of them as a personal boast. This is not arrogance, it's just history. It's just history, it's what occurred. This was not an automatic ability. Their understanding and wisdom rested on the centrality of God's revelation. So verses 18 and 19, then at the end of the days, which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all, not one, was found, like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. So, when the end of the 3 years of training, remember, there's a lot to learn. Got to do the language first, because you got to learn all these other things taught in the Chaldean language. So at the end of 3 years of training, all the candidates were presented to the king. They were handpicked by the king himself. This gives us some key to the significance of this training and selection process. We will see this repeated many times throughout this book. We can apply these principles to our own relationship with the King of Kings and our responsibilities to his servants. He selects us. He chooses us. You come to this Bible study because he brings you, not me. He brings you. He equips us. While we're busy saying, I can't do that, he calls us, so he's going to equip us. He clears away barriers to our service. He does. He rewards our obedience to the principles of his word. Walvoord, I like to do, he's a good DTS person that's gone to be with the Lord a long time ago. But he said that even this praise is mentioned in such a matter-of-fact way, and so evidently due to the grace of God, that Daniel is delivered from the charge of boasting. because he wrote this book, and when you read that, you think, oh, he's boasting. No, he's delivered from the charge of boasting. So you have to be careful. Nebuchadnezzar is going to get in big trouble for boasting, big trouble. So Nebuchadnezzar himself was an extraordinarily intelligent man, and this was shown in his great exploits. He was quick to respond to these bright young minds. He was. So in verses 20 and 21, as for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in his realm. That's who the kings used to turn to. They used to have these magicians and conjurers that used to tell them, decipher things, tell them what they needed to do. So, and Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So Daniel served the court in Babylon. If you remember, why did the king select these boys with specific requirements? Why did he select them? Why did he take care of them their way, Babylonian way? Why did he do all that? For service. They were to serve him, the king, in his service. Remember, Daniel and these boys went over to Babylon. It was about 8 years before the rest came that were to be exiled. So, Daniel served the court in Babylon until about 539 BC, and possibly considerably longer. Whether this verse indicates that Daniel held the official position until the first year and then served in emeritus capacity, we don't know. Certainly no character of the Old Testament, apart from Joseph in Egypt, ever exerted influence in the affairs of pagan nations to the extent that Daniel did. So, an important book. The first chapter teaches us that righteousness begins with a firm commitment to God. The events in this chapter should be an encouragement to us when we experience trials and testing and become discouraged. Things don't always go to suit us. And in studying this book, which has always been a very important book to me, you make choices, not what appeals to you, to us, may not, but it's God's choice for you. We search for that. We look to God and we ask for his direction and we wait for it. For anything. Oh, I want this. I like this. I'm going to do this. I'm looking for these things. This is what would make me happy. This is what would improve my worship. God says, I'll take care of that. I want you in a certain place to do a certain thing. That's what you do. We don't think that way. We often don't think that way. We let the world make our decisions for us. And our friends, they help with that, and sometimes our family. So, sometimes listening to family, I wouldn't have been teaching quite a number of years ago, because they saw me as, hey, you need to just take a break. You need to just retire from that, bake cookies, and do these things. And that is not, if you search for God, when I searched for God, he said, I'll tell you when to quit. Retire's not in the Bible. I've looked. It isn't in there. It isn't. And to serve him is the joyous thing, and it is the Lord who decides what you quit doing, whatever it is that he has called you to do. He makes that decision. And you're not supposed to be complaining either, because Pastor just told us all about that too. So you can't, that was our 7-day challenge. And it was one of those sermons. He often preaches those sermons kind of thing, and you go out and you say, oh man, I got to go home and repent, and I got to straighten up this and not complain about that, and so forth and so on. So the book of Daniel, you look at the events in this chapter, should be an encouragement to us. When we experience trials, we are tested. Believe me, God's going to test us. He is. And we sometimes are discouraged. When God is not allowed to rule, folks, he overrules. He overrules. God is still on the throne. He will never leave us. Has the enemy destroyed the holy city and the holy temple and taken God's people captive? Fear not. Fear not. There is still a godly remnant that worships the true God and serves him. Let me tell you, I love to study the remnant churches in God's Word. There are remnant churches. There are now. And it is, let me tell you, it would never be easy, really, to be a remnant church, to be in a remnant church. Because remnant churches don't offer all the amenities. The amenities. All the programs. And I used to go to Curves before they sort of went out of business and faded away. And I would often on Monday morning ask the people about their church service and what they believed. And it was always interesting because it was never about God. Oh, I go to this. They have the best child care. I can just leave my kids there and go and get a break from that. Then be careful. God might give you a break from that. Be careful. I want this at my church and that at my church. It's something that God says, I'm going to put you over here in a remnant church. And I tell you, I came from First Baptist Church of Jacksonville, Florida, which was Homer Lindsay Sr., the pastor. He always got up there in a white suit, and he was looked like a big bottle of milk of magnesia, pointing that finger at us, but let me tell you, that was a helpful thing, because when I married, the young man was licensed to preach and ordained in that church, and we went out from that church to a home mission field. And oh my goodness, let me tell you, you go out there and if you can search and find somebody that can play the piano even. I mean, it is a bare bones. You get there and start the furnace going, and it is bare bones. So bare bones that I learned to play the piano. I went to lessons. I told the piano teacher, I just want to learn to play the piano. Hymns, that's all I want to play, just hymns. And so I learned to play whatever hymns had 3 flats, and I told those people, this is what you can sing. So I told my husband, I said, this is what they can sing. Don't let them choose anything else, because I can only play 3 flats. So, folks, it's where God puts you, what God deals with you, and because he will bless you wherever, just as he did with these young men. Can you imagine somebody just eating vegetables and drinking water, and they were fatter? They were fatter. So pay attention to the message that God has through this book. It's a powerful message, really. So he said, fear not, there's still a godly remnant that worships the true God and serves him. Does the enemy attempt to defile the godly remnant? Oh, yes. Fear not, for the Lord will work on their behalf and keep them separated to himself. They'll remain the remnant, his remnant. Are godly believers needed in places of authority? Fear not, for the Lord will see to it that they are prepared and appointed. Does the Lord desire to communicate his prophetic truth to his people? Fear not, for he will keep his servants alive and alert until their work is done. That's what he will do. Are you in a place of responsibility and wondering how long you can hold out because it may be tough? Fear not, for the same God who called you and equipped you is able to make you continue until you complete the task that he has assigned you. That's quite a message. Each believer is either a conformer or a transformer. We're either being squeezed into the world's mold, which, that's easy. That's easy. Or we are transforming things in the world into which God has put us. Which he has put us. Transformers don't always have an easy life, but it's an exciting one, and it gives great delight to know that God is using you to influence others for him. There is a phrase in the book of Daniel that is not repeated about anybody else in the Bible. 3 times in the book, he is referred to as a man greatly beloved. Why? Because he was championed of his people in exile. Look how long he was there. He was there up in his 80s. So Daniel, he was the one from whom they got their strength. They knew Daniel would do the right thing. Oh, he will. That is the power of an uncompromised life in that day and in this day. So, in finishing, I want to leave you with Psalm 139:17. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Just so let that soak in for a while. So, is this precious to you folks? If it is, hold on to it. Wonderful, wonderful psalm. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. His thoughts to each of us. How precious. Did you ever think about that? Go sit home and think about that. Think about what his thoughts are to you. And how vast is the sum of them. How vast. So, remember, this is precious to you. Hang on to it. So, chapter 1, we have finished. We will do chapter 2 next week. And each week, believe me, in this book, there will be lessons for you from Daniel. So think about if you had been a teen, you had been forcibly removed from your parents' home, taken off with a powerful, could be very violent king, taken off with no one. How would you react to that? How would you react if you were offered the king's fare? Take good care of you for 3 years. You're going to have to learn all this. You might say, oh, goodness, well, they could just teach me in my own language. Nope, you have to learn the Chaldean language. So it's a good time to take chapter 1 and just reflect on that and let the thoughts of God be present, and they are vast. So we're